His hands were shaking so bad he almost dropped it back into the water. The red container banged against the side of the skiff like it was trying to get away, and Marcus leaned over the gunwale with his jaw tight and his breath stuck in his throat. His phone buzzed hard in his pocket again and again like a tiny angry animal, and he didn't even have to look to know it was another bank alert because the last one had already made his stomach twist. Cold coffee sat in the cup holder by his knee, watered down and bitter, the kind you buy because you want to feel normal for 5 minutes. A small wave slapped the hull and sprayed his face, and for a second he tasted salt and something like rust. Marcus hauled the container onto the deck and stared at it like it could explain his whole life if he just stared long enough. It wasn't a cooler and it wasn't a toolbox either. It was bright red, scuffed up, with faded stickers on one side and a thick lid that looked like it could keep a secret. His palms left wet prints on the plastic as he turned it over and found a metal latch that didn't belong on something meant to float around the Gulf. He swallowed and looked at the shoreline of Galveston in the distance, the gray strip of buildings and the line of cranes that always reminded him of people who got paid on time. He grabbed the latch, felt it resist, and then it gave. The lid popped a little and a smell came out that wasn't fish or seaweed. It smelled like clean plastic and old paper, like a storage unit. Marcus blinked fast because his eyes suddenly burned, and he hated that his body could still surprise him like that. Inside was a sealed bag, the kind people use for flood kits, and inside that was a phone wrapped in a towel and a handful of envelopes and a laminated photo that made Marcus go completely still. In the photo was a woman smiling with her eyes closed like she was holding back tears, and next to her was a little boy with a gap in his teeth, both of them wearing the same cheap blue ponchos Marcus had bought once from the gas station before a storm. Marcus didn't realize he'd sat down until his knees hit the deck. His phone buzzed again and he finally pulled it out and saw the words he'd been avoiding all week. He stared at the screen until it blurred and a tear fell right onto the glass, making the letters swim. He wiped it with his thumb like he could erase the whole thing. Then he looked back into the container and felt that old, familiar fear rise up in him. The fear that life was about to ask him for something he didn't have. Earlier that morning, Marcus had told himself he would not think about the eviction notice taped crooked on his apartment door. He'd peeled it off quickly, folded it twice, and shoved it into the glove box like it was a receipt. He told himself he would not think about the voicemail from his ex, Tasha, the one he'd listened to in the parking lot of the bait shop and then deleted because it made him feel like he was sitting in a room where everyone could see the worst parts of him. All she'd said was that she couldn't keep waiting for him to get it together, and she didn't say it mean, which somehow made it worse. Marcus was 38 and he could pull nets and fix motors and read weather like a second language, but paperwork and promises and deadlines made him feel like a kid again. A kid watching adults talk over his head, knowing something bad was coming but not knowing how to stop it. He'd grown up in Texas City in a small apartment that always smelled like frying oil because his mom worked double shifts at a diner and came home too tired to pretend things were fine. She used to say a phrase when the lights got cut off or when the car didn't start. "We'll figure it out." Marcus hated that he'd started saying it too, like it was a prayer you repeat when you don't have a plan. The last 2 years had been a slow slide. First the engine trouble that cost more than he had. Then the storm season that kept him tied to the dock longer than he could afford. Then the new guy at the marina who was always smiling and always talking about content and branding and selling shirts online like fishing was a hobby you could package. Marcus tried not to judge, but it did something sharp to him to see someone turn the thing that was crushing him into a lifestyle. He wasn't lazy and he wasn't stupid. He was just tired. Tired of the math never working out. Tired of buying ice and bait with money that already belonged to rent. Tired of standing at the register pretending he didn't notice the cashier looking at his card a second too long before saying it didn't go through. That morning at the dock, he'd kept his face neutral while the marina manager talked about late fees like they were weather updates. Marcus nodded, said he understood, and felt his chest tighten as if understanding was supposed to fix anything. He'd launched anyway because staying home would mean sitting on the edge of his bed listening to the upstairs neighbor's TV and wondering what it feels like to not be afraid of your own mailbox. Out on the water, he could at least do something with his hands. He could at least chase the idea that today might be decent. The sea didn't care about his credit score or his pride. The sea just moved the way it moved. When he saw the red container bobbing in the chop, his first thought was that it might be salvage he could sell. Not something exciting, just something to turn into $50. $50 was groceries. $50 was a small breath of air. He'd hooked it, dragged it closer, and the weight of it made him think maybe it held tools or parts. Then he saw the latch and felt his skin prickle. Now he was sitting on the deck with the lid open, looking at a photo that didn't belong to him but somehow felt like it did. He picked up the laminated picture carefully like it might fall apart if he breathed wrong. On the back, written in neat block letters, was a name and a date. Maya and Eli 2019. Marcus looked out at the water again, scanning like he expected to see someone waving from a distance. But there was only the usual horizon and the low winter sun trying to break through the haze. He reached back into the container and pulled out one of the envelopes. It wasn't addressed to a house. It was addressed to a person. Eli. Marcus stared at it until his throat hurt. He didn't know who Maya was and he didn't know who Eli was, but he knew what it meant to keep something safe. He knew what it meant to hold onto a piece of your life and hope it survives the mess. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't the bank. It was a call from an unknown number. He hesitated with his thumb over the screen, heart pounding like he'd done something wrong just by opening the lid. Then he answered, voice rough. Hello. For a moment there was only wind and faint background noise, like someone standing outside a building trying to decide whether to come in. Then a woman spoke, quiet and tight. Is this Marcus Danem? His stomach dropped. He hadn't heard his full name said like that in a long time, not with that kind of careful fear. Yes, he said, and his eyes went back to the red container like it was listening too. The woman exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. I'm looking for something, she said, and her voice cracked on the last word, like it hurt to even say it out loud. Marcus swallowed hard, fingers closing around the edge of the photo. What kind of something, he asked, even though he already felt the answer sitting in his lap. Marcus cut the engine and let the skiff drift while the woman on the phone explained in short broken sentences that sounded practiced, like she had said them too many times already. Her name was Maya and she said she had lost something important during a move when a storm came faster than expected, and she had tied the container to the dock thinking it would be safe, and then it was gone, and she had spent weeks calling marinas and posting online and leaving her number with people who mostly looked at her like she was chasing a ghost. Marcus listened more than he talked because that was easier than trying to explain what it felt like to be holding proof of someone else's life in his hands. He told her he had found a red container floating off the coast, and there was a pause so long he wondered if the call had dropped. When she spoke again her voice sounded smaller like the wind had knocked something out of it. You opened it, she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Yes, Marcus said, and he waited for anger or panic or some demand that he bring it back right now. Instead she said thank you over and over again until Marcus felt embarrassed in a way he couldn't explain. They agreed to meet later that afternoon at a small coffee place near the seawall, one of those places with chipped tables and a handwritten menu where people came more to sit than to order. Marcus wrapped everything back into the container carefully, even the envelopes he hadn't opened, and snapped the lid shut like he was sealing a promise. As he headed back toward the marina, he noticed his shoulders were tight. Not with stress exactly, but with something like responsibility. He kept thinking about the photo and how Maya's smile looked like it was trying to convince someone everything was fine. At the dock, the marina manager raised an eyebrow at Marcus like he wanted to say something about the early return, but Marcus just nodded and kept walking. Driving into town, Marcus caught himself rehearsing what he would say, then stopping because he didn't know what the right words were. He wasn't good at moments like this. He was good at showing up, not at talking. The coffee shop smelled like burnt espresso and lemon cleaner, and it reminded Marcus of mornings when he used to meet Tasha before work and they'd split a muffin because neither of them wanted to admit they were broke. Maya was already there when he walked in, sitting with her hands wrapped around a paper cup like it was the only warm thing in the room. She looked tired in a real way, not the kind you fix with sleep. Her eyes went straight to the red container in his hands and filled instantly, and she stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Marcus froze because he didn't know if he should hand it to her right away or say something first. She solved it by stepping closer and putting her hand on the lid like she needed to feel it to believe it was real. "Thank you," she said again, quieter this time, like it was just for him. He shrugged, because he didn't know what else to do, and said, "I'm just glad I saw it." They sat down across from each other, and for a minute neither of them spoke. The container sat between them like a third person at the table. Finally Maya opened it and checked everything quickly but gently, counting with her eyes, touching the towel, the envelopes, the photo. When she reached the picture she pressed it to her chest for a second, and Marcus looked away because it felt too private. "That's my son," she said, like she needed to say it out loud. Marcus nodded and said he figured. She laughed softly at that, not because it was funny, but because the truth sometimes slips out that way. They talked in small pieces at first. Maya told him she worked nights at a hospital as a tech and days were always a blur. She told him Eli was in school now and liked dinosaurs and hated wearing socks. Marcus told her about fishing and storms and how the water changed color depending on the time of day. Neither of them talked about why the container had been so carefully packed or why it mattered so much. Not yet. At some point Maya pushed an envelope toward him. "Please," she said. "I want you to take this." Marcus shook his head right away because he knew what it was, and his pride flared up automatically. "I didn't do it for money," he said, too fast. "I know," she said, meeting his eyes, "but I need to feel like I gave something back." That stopped him because he understood that feeling. They sat there a while longer, talking about nothing important, the way strangers sometimes do when they're not ready to leave a moment that feels balanced. When they finally stood up, Maya took the container, and Marcus felt a strange emptiness like something had been removed from his life as quickly as it had entered. Outside, the wind was sharp and the sky looked low and heavy. Maya thanked him again and asked if he was okay, really okay, and Marcus almost laughed at the question. "I'm figuring it out," he said, the same phrase he hated, but it came out honest. She nodded like she understood more than he had said. As Marcus walked back to his truck, he noticed his phone hadn't buzzed in a while. The problems were still there. The eviction notice still waited. The numbers hadn't changed. But something inside him had shifted just enough to make the weight feel shared, even if only for an afternoon. He didn't know Maya and she didn't know him, but for a few hours, their lives had touched in a way that made the world feel slightly less closed. And that scared him a little. Because hope always did. Marcus sat in his truck longer than he meant to after the coffee shop door closed behind him, and he watched Maya walk away toward the bus stop holding the red container close to her side like it still might disappear if she loosened her grip, and when she turned the corner and was gone the quiet rushed in all at once, filling the space she left behind and making his chest feel heavier than before. He started the engine but did not drive right away, and his phone sat face down in the cup holder for once, ignored on purpose because he kept seeing the image of Maya pressing that photo to her chest without thinking, and it stirred something deep behind his ribs that he did not have a name for. The drive back to his apartment felt longer than usual with traffic lights catching him again, and when he finally parked the building looked exactly the same, cracked stucco, faded paint, and the eviction notice still taped to his door moving slightly in the warm breeze like it wanted his attention, and he felt that familiar wave of shame wash over him. Inside the apartment, the quiet was thick, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator, and Marcus leaned against the counter with his eyes closed, and let himself imagine a version of his life that did not always feel like it was about to tip over, not a miracle, just a small sense of balance. His phone buzzed and he checked it reluctantly and saw a voicemail notification from an unknown number, and after a long pause he pressed play and heard Tasha's voice, careful and tired, saying she was moving in with her sister for a while and changing her number, and that she hoped he was okay. And when the message ended, Marcus felt something settle inside him, not sharp pain but a final kind of understanding. He sank onto the couch and stared at the wall, thinking about how long he had told himself things would get better soon, and how he had waited for the right conditions instead of adjusting to the ones he had, and how much energy it took to keep pretending he was not scared all the time. The truth came quietly and stayed that fishing still mattered to him, but it was no longer giving back what it once had, and the stress never let up, and every storm felt like a threat instead of part of the job, and admitting that felt like failure because his father had fished until his body could not take it anymore, and Marcus had always sworn he would never quit. He stood by the window and watched a neighbor help her child with a bike helmet, adjusting the strap patiently like time was not something they were running out of, and Marcus felt a tight pull in his chest that he recognized as envy, not for the life itself, but for the sense of direction. Another message came from the marina manager about late fees stacking up and needing to talk soon, and Marcus typed a response and deleted it twice before putting the phone down because he realized he was exhausted in a way sleep could not fix, exhausted from carrying everything alone and measuring his worth by how much he could endure. His mother's voice floated into his mind saying, "We will figure it out," and for the first time he wondered if that meant being honest about when something was no longer working instead of pushing through no matter what, and that thought scared him more than the bills. He pulled out an old notebook, and on a blank page wrote down what he actually had: skills, time, a truck, a boat that still ran, and a body that worked, and then he wrote down what he did not have: stability, savings, peace, and seeing it written out did not solve anything, but it made it real. A message from Maya came in saying her son would not stop asking about the fisherman who found their container, and thanking Marcus again, and hoping he was taking care of himself, and he stared at the screen longer than he expected because no one had asked him that in a long time. He typed back slowly saying he was trying, and that he was glad everything made it back safe, and when he set the phone down he felt clarity settle in, not relief, but a steady understanding that if he kept living the same way he would only grow more tired and smaller. That night he lay awake listening to the building settle, and thought about other possibilities: dock work, maintenance, teaching kids basic boating skills, things close to the water, but not dependent on luck alone, and the idea was not exciting but it felt steady, and steadiness felt like air. By morning the fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him, and for the first time in a long while Marcus believed he might choose differently, not because it was easy but because staying stuck had finally become harder. Marcus woke before his alarm with the pale light already pushing through the thin blinds, and for once his first thought was not panic, but a slow awareness of his own breathing, and the room around him, and the fear was still there, but it sat quietly like a tired animal that had stopped pacing. He made coffee at home instead of stopping at the gas station, and it tasted weak but familiar, and he drank it standing by the sink looking out at the parking lot where nothing dramatic was happening, and that felt strangely comforting. Later that morning he drove to the marina not to fish but to talk, and the decision felt heavier than any net he had ever pulled, and when he walked into the office the manager looked surprised to see him without gear or bait, but Marcus kept his voice steady and said he needed to be honest. He did not explain his whole life, and he did not make excuses. He just said he could not keep up with the slip fees and that he needed time to figure out his next step, and the manager listened and nodded and offered a short extension, not as a favor but as a practical choice, and that small kindness felt bigger than Marcus expected. When he stepped back outside the air felt different, not lighter exactly but clearer, and he sat on the dock for a while watching the water move the way it always had, and he realized the sea had never promised him anything except itself. Over the next few days Marcus started doing small things that did not feel heroic, but felt necessary. He called a local repair shop about part-time work, and signed up to help with basic boat safety classes at the community center on weekends, and each step felt awkward, like wearing shoes that were not broken in yet, but they did not hurt. The eviction did not disappear, but the landlord agreed to a payment plan after Marcus finally made the call he had been avoiding, and hearing himself speak plainly without apology changed something in him. One evening Maya texted again with a picture of Eli wearing a paper captain hat, smiling wide, and holding up a drawing of a red boat on blue water, and Marcus laughed out loud in his empty apartment, surprised by the sound of it. He did not reply right away, but when he did he thanked her and said the picture made his day, and he meant it in a way that felt simple and clean. Weeks passed, and life did not suddenly become easy, but it became manageable, and Marcus noticed he slept better, and checked his phone without flinching, and when he went out on the water it was by choice, not desperation. One afternoon he stood on the dock teaching a small group how to tie knots, and he caught himself explaining patiently the way his father once had, and he felt something like pride settle in his chest without needing to prove itself. The red container still crossed his mind, sometimes not as a symbol or a turning point, but as a reminder that lives brushed up against each other in quiet ways, and that showing up mattered even when you were struggling yourself. On a calm evening, Marcus sat on the steps outside his apartment watching the sky fade, and he thought about how success used to mean surviving, and how now it meant choosing with intention even when the options were limited. He knew there would be harder days ahead, and moments when doubt would creep back in, but he also knew he was no longer frozen by it. The world had not changed and he had not escaped his problems, but he had learned that self-worth did not come from enduring pain alone, and that accepting help and change did not erase who you were. As the first stars appeared, Marcus took a deep breath, and let it out slowly, and felt grounded in a way he had not in a long time. Sometimes a small win was enough to keep going, and sometimes sharing that truth was how others realized they were not alone. If you have ever felt stuck or afraid to let go of a version of your life that no longer fits, maybe your moment has not passed yet, maybe it is still waiting quietly to be noticed.